Hello, and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp June. She's the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. Today is June 26th, 2024. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I'll be your host. You can send your questions and comments to Helga via email to questions@schillerinstitute.org, or you can post them on the YouTube chat page. Well, Helga, last Friday's International Peace Coalition meeting adopted a resolution which could not have been more timely given the attacks on Crimea on June 23rd. There was a discussion of the peace proposal issued by President Putin, which was dismissed, rejected, or ignored by most Western leaders. And a proposal was made to support Putin's peace initiative, drafted by the East German Board of Trustees of Associations. And this was adopted by the International Peace Coalition members. What's the content of the resolution, and how can this be used to intervene in the present crisis?
Well, it is an effort to, get back to a dialogue in the international, arena, because we are, and that is what concerns many people in the West. We are right now in an extremely dangerous spiral of escalation, whereby, no matter what happens, the NATO countries are, for the most part, dead set of escalating. And I think the recent example of that was the attack in Sevastopol on the beach by 5 US ATACMs missiles armored with cluster bombs, and they hit a beach on Trinity Sunday, which is a high religious holiday according to the Russian Orthodox Church. There were many families on the beach, and more than 150 people got injured, 4 got killed. Many are still in severe conditions. And this was a only civilian target. Now, in the meantime, it is very clear that this could not have happened without the US fully guiding the targets. The whole technical supervision of these ATACMs are not Ukrainian; they are entirely American. So naturally, the response from Russia was extremely sharp, because also on the same day, another terrorist attack occurred in Dagestan, hitting a church and I think a synagogue. And, that was also a terrorist attack very clearly. So, there is very clearly an attempt to escalate the confrontation. And one cannot help to think of the, plan which was proposed by the Royal Institute of Security, the RUSI Institute in Great Britain, almost more than a year ago, where they said we have to boil the Russian frog by increasing the temperature on and on, eventually leading to a Cuban Missile Crisis on steroids, where you have a nuclear confrontation, and then maybe at the height of such a nuclear crisis, Cuban Missile Crisis 2 on steroids, maybe then the leaders are more willing to negotiate. I mean, this is pure insanity, and it increases the threshold of the potential catastrophe where something unexpected can happen, especially in light of a complete breakdown of all disarmament agreements and arms control agreements, which makes the situation so much worse than during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So in this environment, already naturally before, but in this environment, Putin had issued this proposal, which the Western media reduced to just a proposal on Ukraine. But that was only the end of a 1-hour speech he gave in front of the Foreign Ministry on June 14th, where he proposed a comprehensive Eurasian new security architecture open for NATO countries. And saying this is maybe the last moment before a catastrophe can annihilate entire human civilization. and it was an urgent call to sit down on the negotiation table. Now, as you say, the Western leaders categorically rejected that without even bothering to read the whole thing, just referring to the last part, the proposal for settling of the Ukraine crisis. So the East German Association, the umbrella organization of East German associations of various kinds, they issued an appeal to support this proposal. And we invited a spokesman of the OKW to present this proposal, and it was discussed at length by all the participants of the IPC. And we decided ad hoc in a resolution that we would try to get support for this, because we need to go back to the negotiation table. So I think this is extremely important. And, I would urge all of you, our viewers, to, check the resolution, to check the Putin speech, and to check also the 10 principles I had proposed already, more than 1.5 years ago, what such a security and development architecture should look like. And you will find that there is an amazing affinity between Putin's proposal of June 14th and what I proposed in November 22. And that is why I have a very easy time to agree and say this we should put on the table and go back to diplomacy and stop this absolutely immoral, extremely dangerous escalation, which can only lead to a world war in which nobody would live. So please study these proposals and help us to get as many signatures of individuals, institutions, and organizations, because I think we need to really change the agenda. Now, there are some signs that the dangerous situation gets to some politicians. For example, while Chancellor Scholz in his government declaration today, again, for the second time, flatly refused this proposal by Putin by saying, this can only be believed by people who are listening too much to RT Germany. This is the Russian program, which is, it's just a silly response. But fortunately, Friedrich Merz, who is the opposition leader and likely chancellor candidate of the opposition, given the fact that the Ampel coalition has maybe still something like 25% of the vote or less, I don't know exactly, but they are dwindling and crashing in the polls. This makes this statement by Merz somewhat important, because he said already 2 days ago that there may have to be a rethinking on the Ukraine situation, because that it's maybe time to think about how to end the war with a ceasefire or with some peace negotiations. Now, this is very interesting. What the media are saying about that is that this has something to do with the upcoming elections in 3 eastern states, in Saxony, Brandenburg, and Thüringen, where naturally the mood of the population is overwhelmingly to stop this crisis, and they're not believing the narrative about what NATO is trying to tell them. So that may be a factor, but I think even more important is the fact that the German economy is just collapsing, falling down like a stone, and there is massive pressure by industry to stop this insane confrontation course, which will ruin Germany economically. So they're leaning heavily on Merz. That is a big factor as well. And Macron, who recently was the key warmonger in demanding French and other NATO troops to be sent to Ukraine, now is all of a sudden, again, obviously also under the impact of a tumultuous domestic situation. He is calling to go back to discussions with Putin, and he said he's believing in the power of dialogue, and he wants to be in the dialogue with Putin. So as you can see, there is flux, and that has to do with, that people vacillate between, obedience to the NATO narrative and a perceived fundamentally different self-interest. And that is why I think such an intervention to actually gather support for such a dialogue based on Putin's proposal is extremely important.
Well, Madeline assured me before we came on that the proposal will be posted, is now posted on the schillerinstitute.com website, so people can download it, read it, and circulate it. Now, I have a question from a medical professional in North Carolina who writes, I don't think most Americans realize that one or two more attacks like the one which hit the beach in Crimea will put enormous pressure on Putin to escalate. I've heard Scott Ritter and others warn about the danger of nuclear war, but the main media won't cover it. Does Biden think that Putin won't respond? Why do they keep pushing this way?
Well, it's very hard to figure out what Biden is thinking because it seems to be, vacillating a lot, and one doesn't get a clear idea. But I think the powers to be, that is the military-industrial complex, or the MITIMEC, as Ray McGovern always calls it, meaning the military-industrial congressional academic think tank academia complex, I think they are completely freaked out about the fact that the Western model is not functioning. The financial system is in shambles and overdebted, and there's no easy way inside how that can be remedied. And they're seeing that there is this other world system emerging with the BRICS Plus. But as Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov recently pointed out, it's not just the BRICS, it's the Eurasian Economic Union, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, ASEAN, several other such organizations who are forming a different economic system, which is based on sovereignty, on non-interference, on allowing for the different social system of the other country. And they are basically focusing on investment in the real economy, while the West is entirely focusing on making the military strong, but neglecting the civil economy. And that naturally goes along with brutal austerity against all kinds of things for the population. So, I think it's one of the most remarkable phenomena of this present crisis, that while it is clear to the whole world, I mean, to the global majority and many people in the West as well, that what the Chinese and their, friends and colleagues in other states are doing is in the interest of the people, because it pertains to the living standard, to the increase of the living condition for the people. While what the West is trying to do is they're trying to assert hegemony by cutting the living standard, by going into brutal austerity, cutting hospitals, cutting schools, cutting all the things which make life worth living. And, rather than thinking, and reflecting, maybe it would be wise for the Western countries to go back to a different policy tradition, like the founding fathers, like Alexander Hamilton, like Lincoln, like Franklin D. Roosevelt, like Kennedy. No, they are seemingly incapable of correcting their mistakes, and they're trying to double down by escalating the confrontation with Russia and with China not looming far in the background. So I think this is definitely something which needs a massive intervention by the population, by thinking people who are professors, academics, retired military, all kinds of people who have an opinion on that. They should speak out while we still can do that. Because I think that only if we move to a situation where the collective West stops the geopolitical confrontation and says, okay, the world is shifting, there are more power centers emerging, but we cooperate, and that way we can resolve all problems easily through dialogue. And I know it would be easy, if Biden would reach out and call Xi Jinping call Putin and say, look, let's have a summit, let's discuss how we get a better policy, I'm 100% sure it would be responded positively. Now, Putin's proposal is such a stretching out, and that's why we need to build as much support for it as possible.
Okay, we're getting some questions coming in, and those of you who have questions can send them to us at questions@schillerinstitute.org. This one is from Connie, and it refers to the release of Julian Assange, which I'm sure you have some thoughts about that. But Connie asks, is Biden trying to score points for his reelection, especially among students, or is there more to the release of Assange than we're hearing?
Well, the best I know is that is a very likely hypothesis that Biden, would not want to have, this terrible situation hanging around his shoulders going into the hot phase of the election campaign. I mean, there's a lot of debate about it, where some people are just expressing happiness that he's finally in freedom. Others criticize that, he made a deal whereby he admitted some guilt concerning the espionage accusation. My view on this matter is that it is very, very good that he is in freedom, because if he would have stayed in prison much longer, there was a serious threat to his life. He has 2 children, and he has a wife, and he now can, hopefully go back to some form of normality. And, I fully endorse his decision. Now, the not so nice part about it is that it came at the price of admitting a guilt which he does not have. Because, even the German TV, which is among the most controlled media in the planet, at least for their normal coverage, they had some commentaries which I think were very important that they got out. Namely, they said that what Assange was accused of was that he published some videos many years ago which showed war crimes by American, I think also British soldiers in Afghanistan, in Iraq, which were quite horrible, where soldiers were shooting on civilians on the ground, like as if it was a video game, and then, egging each other on, saying, oh, here's another one, we have to get this one, shooting that one down. I mean, this is so absolutely incredible, terrible. And if you have a journalist who, says this has to become known, that's what should be supported, because if a government or an army or whoever is involved in such activities, it should not go it should not go unpunished. But obviously, the message which is supposed to be gotten out to the world is, if you do this, if you are an investigative journalist, look at what happened to Assange. He had to be, in the Ecuador embassy in exile for, I think, 5 years, and then in the Baltimore prison for 7 years. So this is what happens to you if you dare to do this. Now, I think hopefully this will lead to a reflection and saying, are we the democracy? Are we supposed to be the countries of the rules-based order, the freedom of speech, freedom of thought, human rights? Well, I think we are really in danger of losing these things if we don't correct this very urgently. So I think this will have an aftermath, because hopefully, there will be a reflection of this, and hopefully the freedom of the press will not die with this case, which is obviously what the intention was.
Now, I have a question from Serbia. Actually, 2 people from Serbia sent in responses to your quoting President Vučić last week, where he warned that we may be headed toward World War III within 3 to 6 months. Neither of these people say they like Vucic, who they're accusing now of making deals with European Union companies to sell off Serbia's lithium deposits. But one of them said she believes that there is a way out of this. She said that she believes Putin's response to the most recent attack should be to expand the BRICS alliance. And she asks, what do you think about that?
I think the BRICS is not it's not a counter to NATO. While NATO is a extremely centralized with a tight bureaucracy on control on top of it organization, the BRICS are a rather loose association of partners, and they are basically based on completely different principles of just economic cooperation on the basis of a win-win cooperation. And I think that the more countries would join that, the better. I mean, many years ago in 2014, I remember that we from the Schiller Institute campaigned for even the United States to join the BRICS. I don't know if that is feasible right now. I think it would not be in contradiction at all to the cohesion of the West. I mean, this idea that the Russians and the Chinese are the enemies and then they have to be defeated, that is the narrative which will lead to World War III. I think the BRICS is an option. It's sort of like the lifeboat for the sinking Titanic. And I think if countries would decide to join the BRICS, they could also become the bridge to countries in the West to try to go back to dialogue and cooperation. So I think, since there are already, as far as I know, 59 countries who have applied to become BRICS members, it could very well be, it could become like an umbrella organization uniting all countries on the planet.
Now, we have a question from Debashius, who often sends in questions. He said that he heard today that Lloyd Austin called his Russian counterpart, and that this is the first communication between the U.S. Defense Secretary and his Russian counterpart in some time. But he said, did this actually happen? And if so, what does it indicate?
Well, I think it did happen because there was a news reported on both sides. So I think that confirms it. And I think it's very good because for more than a year, there was no communication among the two defense ministers. And that is always extremely dangerous because if people don't talk to each other anymore, the opportunity to remove misunderstandings is zero. So while we do not know yet what the content was, the readouts was very slim. It just said Ukraine and other issues. So one can imagine that the attack in Sevastopol was a topic, and the implication of hopefully how to contain further escalations. I mean, the Russian response to the Sevastopol attack had been extremely harsh because I think Russian Ambassador Nebenzia in Washington had blasted the US and said that there is 100% certainty that this was done by the United States, and that somebody else said in the meantime Russia has become a war participating party. Now, what could be more dangerous than to have the two most powerful nuclear forces being at war with each other, or de facto almost being at a full declared war? So I think this came really at the absolute urgent moment, and one could only hope that a kind of civilized dialogue among the nuclear superpowers would become the normal standard again.
Well, maybe Lloyd Austin was paying attention to the resolution that came through the International Peace Coalition meeting, which called for that. And let me use this as the opportunity to tell people that there will be another call this Friday. I think it's going to be the 55th or 56th straight week for a discussion, and people can join that. So look at the schillerinstitute.com to get a link to the International Peace Coalition meeting and become active with us. Now, Helga, I have a couple more questions that I think are interesting. There's a woman from Arizona writes, I live near the border with Mexico, and we have a big immigration problem. I used to think Trump's idea of a wall was bad, but I'm not sure anymore. I hear there are immigration problems in Europe as well, and people are demanding action there also. What are the countries in Europe doing about immigration? Does the European Union have a plan?
Well, yes, but that plan is very terrible, because that plan basically is the idea that you work with countries around the Mediterranean, and you make deals with them whereby they keep the potential refugees from crossing the Mediterranean or using some other route like the Balkans, or from Africa to the Canary Islands, all of which always have extremely high mortality rates. People are drowning, and the Mediterranean has become a mass grave already. This is pushed through with military means. This organization Frontex has been accused of terrible acts many times by now. So that is not a solution. And the Global South looks at the EU and says, how can they claim to be for human rights if they're treating human beings like this? So I can only strongly warn against the model of the European Union, which is disgusting, to say the least. I mean, look, right now, the only way how we can solve the migrant problem is by developing the Global South. Right now you have a whole upheaval of countries of the global majority. That is 85% of the human species in Latin America, Asia, Africa. These countries want to end colonialism. And they see China and the Belt and Road Initiative, and they see the kind of infrastructure project they can have. And that has led to a new optimism whereby these countries basically say they want to stop colonialism, they want to stop being export countries for raw materials, and they want to keep the production and the processing of these raw materials into semi-finished products, into industries, into agriculture, into infrastructure, build up their own economies and overcome poverty, overcome underdevelopment, and that way create conditions where the young people in particular, but all people, want to stay in their own country and help to build it up. I mean, this is what the president of Ghana already said a couple of years ago. He said, do you really think our young people want to flee through the Sahara, the Sahel zone, the Mediterranean, and die on the way, rather than having investments where we create millions of new productive jobs, where all of these people can stay home and help to construct their home country. And I think, given the fact that most countries in Latin America would like exactly that, there are key projects, like in Peru, this new port which is being built, which is a game changer. There are plans for a bi-oceanic railway, connecting the Pacific and the Atlantic across Latin America. All of these are projects which would be an attraction for people not to flee and come to the United States, where they have a miserable flight crossing Central America, being hounded by all kinds of military and police, and then coming to a border where the chance that they may not make it alive is very high. I mean, that is not the way to solve this problem. The United States should join hands with China and agree on certain development projects in Latin America, in Mexico, in Central Asia, Central America, in between Venezuela and Guatemala, in Brazil, in Peru, many projects. And that way, you would create an incentive and atmosphere of hope where all the migrants would want to stay in their home country and build it. And I think that is what we have to fight for. Everything else is disgusting and should really not happen.
Okay, I have one more question for you, Helga. I think you'll like this one. It's an old friend of mine who wrote in and said, Lynn used to use the Yiddish word mishigas when talking about the foolishness of governments, especially of Israeli governments. There seems to be a lot of mishigas in Israel right now. The government seems to be infighting in the midst of a genocide against the Palestinians. What's going to happen there? It looks like Netanyahu has lost his mandate and the real crazies are moving to take over. We need a new Sholem Aleichem to get people to reflect on this craziness. What do you think?
Well, the situation is horrible because just now various international aid organizations published new reports that the hunger, the famine, the hunger crisis in Gaza is just getting worse by the day. Also, UNRWA, is they are one of the organizations who published that they are running out of funds. They cannot do what is their life task to do. So the catastrophe is absolutely continuing. Netanyahu's support is dwindling. There was last Saturday, I think, the largest protest demonstration since October 7th, 150,000 people in Tel Aviv alone. And, I think that, it's very difficult to see, how the inner Israel situation can be resolved. I think what we have proposed with the Oasis plan is, in my view, still the only option. I mean, you have to have a peace conference, a ceasefire, and then you have to put the two-state solution on the table, and you have to have a agreement to develop the entire region with the Oasis plan, create plenty of new water with the peaceful use of nuclear energy. And, I would still hope that the neighbor countries are agreeing to that. And I think, realistically, given the fact that, the interwovenness of the Israel situation and the election campaign in the United States, which is a real complicating factor, does require that you take a totally different approach, which is actually Putin's proposal for a completely new Eurasian security architecture, because it involves all of Eurasia. That would include Southwest Asia, which is part of Eurasia, obviously. And in that context, one could have, in the tradition of the Peace of Westphalia, a peace negotiation whereby, first one agrees on principle, and that is that the name of peace is development for this region more than anything else. And that then you go and discuss out the differences, the details like land ownership. But if you start to develop the region, if you make the deserts green, you reconquer the deserts, you turn desert land into forestry, into land usable for agriculture, then all of these questions of who owns what piece of territory is completely different, because you're increasing the cake rather than fighting for a shrinking number of pieces of the cake. And I think that approach is urgently required. So please support our Oasis plan as part of this new security architecture. And I think that is the only realistic perspective I can talk about.
And when you started talking, I just got a quick message from someone saying, speaking of craziness, what about the US Congress inviting Netanyahu to address them? So Helga, I think we've run out of time, but I do think it's extremely important that people take what you said about this International Peace Coalition resolution and go out with it. So if you want to just conclude with a final comment on that, I think it would be highly appropriate, given the danger that we've seen in the last days with the use of the ATACMs by the Ukrainians with the full support of the United States.
Yes, I do actually ask all of you to help to get this resolution around, get many organizations and individuals to sign it. Hopefully we can do this all over the world. And then, if we have enough together, we can think of, trying to buy advertisements or, get people to make interviews about it. Just, make the awareness that this is a road out of this present danger. So please take this resolution and spread it. Ask people to sign it and join us on Friday in the IPC meeting.
Okay, Helga, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Yes, or on Friday.